Today I'll be showing you guys how to create these modular trees where you can just take a few small pieces and create variations of trees very easily using the power of PCG. So let's get into it. So here we are in a new project, and to get started, first thing we're going to do is go to plugins, search up procedural, and enable procedural content generation framework. Make sure that is on and restart your engine if needed. Now for our trees, I've gone ahead and created a few assets for myself. So I have the trunk and then a few different size branches, as well as the actual leaves mesh that we're using. So this is very much the old school way of doing it, with just two cards in a plus shape. For your method, create as many variations as you want in any shape you want. This will work just as well. So to get started, I'm going to right click and get ourselves a blueprint class actor. This is going to be our BP tree. And I'm going to get ourselves a PCG graph. And this is going to be our PCG tree. Let's open up the BP tree. And in here, the only thing we need to do is just add a PCG component and then plug our graph into our graph node. And that's all we need here. So in our PCG graph, let us get started. The first thing we're going to do is just get the actor data. And this is going to get the information of the point itself. So we're going to do a self, and we're going to go get a single point. So if I now take this BP tree and put it into the level, and then I go ahead and sample this actor, you can see we now get a single point here. And that's exactly what we want. Wherever we have this blueprint, we just want a single tree in our case. So from here, we want to start by spawning in the trunk. So in the static mesh spawner, let's go ahead and add ourselves a mesh entry and specify in our trunk. You can specify for it to choose one of multiple trunks. And that way, if you have different variations of trunks, it will go ahead and populate them accordingly. You don't have to use this for just one specific tree. But now comes the point of how do we now spawn all of the branches off of it. We're going to actually modify the sockets of this mesh and specify where we'd like our branches to be, because depending on the trunk, you might want them at different locations. So go ahead and open your trunk, go to your socket manager here in the top right. You can click it, and if you don't see it, you go under Windows Socket Manager to make sure it's enabled so you can see this option. And then you want to add some sockets. We're going to create a new one, and I'm going to call this branch, and I'm going to add a tag here and specify branch, because we're going to be adding branches, and this is going to be an easy tag for us to use. Now, the previous static mesh, I'm actually going to pipe in the branch that we're going to be piping into it. So in my case, I'll be using branch A, since that is the larger one. I'm going to preview the static mesh right there. Now, nothing has changed, but if I was to move this, you can see it is there just right inside the mesh. So what I can do now is go in here and just position it where I'd like it to be. Now, for this one, I don't care about it rotated 360 degrees around. We will do that in the PCG. Right now, we only care about the spacing vertically and how many we want vertically to be. So I'll go ahead and take this one and go ahead and just duplicate it and move it up. And I can control things like the scale here. I can make it smaller. So I'll go ahead and duplicate a few of these up. So here we go. I've duplicated the point up a few times. And you can see as I'm going up, I'm effectively just scaling the points smaller and larger, depending on how they are. So when they're all the way up here, they're all the way down to 0.45. The ones at the beginning are actually 1.2. They're even larger. You could, of course, keep this all the same size. It all depends on the kind of tree you'd like. This is the kind I'm going for right now. In the same manner as we did this, we want to actually add the same stuff to the branches. Now, I've gone ahead and added the points in as well for the main branch, which is this one right here. And you can see the actual pivot points are now going 360 degrees around. Some of them are going sideways, some of them going up. Now, this one, you want to actually make it 360, because what we'll be doing is we're rotating the branches around, and then we're going to be only taking the ones that are facing upwards, because if you ever look at trees, most trees, they have all their branches and leaves want to reach for the sky. So they're always like angled up slightly. We'll filter out anything below, which means we can go ahead and put it all the way at 360, and it will take care of it. And then we want to have these guys also the points for these. For these, we can go back to the trunk style. So here's the small branch, and you can see I have placed in the leaves on this one. I've added in the points the same way as before, but I'm previewing the leaves, and the difference is I've just changed the tag to leaves instead of branches. Here, I've kept the tag to be branch, but here it is leaves. You can technically use the same tag on absolutely all of them, That is fine. This is more for myself, so I know, okay, this is the leaves section in case I do want to have a setup where at some point I will have both branches and leaves coming out of this one, let's say. But since I only want the leaves from this last one, that's where I specify the tag. So once you have added in all the sockets for all your pieces, we can go back to our PCG tree and start utilizing them. Now, real quickly, I want to give a big shout out to Chilco, who brought this setup to my attention, because at the time I did not realize this out attribute name in a static mesh spawner is a way of actually getting all the static meshes you want out of here. You can use the out attribute to figure out which mesh specifically it is getting and get a reference to it. So that's what we're going to be using. So out the attribute name, I'm going to specify trunk, because we're going to be grabbing the trunk here. And then you want to grab get attribute for point index. And in this node, the out attribute name is going to be trunk. And so all of a sudden we have all the static meshes from the static mesh spawner that we can utilize using this, which means we can grab ourselves a mesh sockets to points. So we'll grab ourselves an execute blueprint and drag this out. And then in the top right, under blueprint element type, I will search socket and grab mesh sockets to points, open it up and plug the attribute into the static mesh. And then we need to specify in the tag. So the tag we specified was branch. As you recall, in our SM trunk, all of these are using the branch tag. And then from here, we want to go ahead and copy the points. So we want to copy these points that it's created, and the target is going to be the original point location. So I'll just pipe it all the way through. And now just to keep in mind that when you do this and you sample it, you won't actually see the points here. And don't you worry, it seems to be a bug right now that for some reason this copy points does not actually show you the points. Don't worry about this, not all this section not showing you the points. That is fine. Now, as you recall, we actually set it up where we have all these branches kind of in a straight line. So we now need to have them go 360 around. So what we're going to do is grab a transform points, and now we want to specify the rotations. Now, what I'm going to do is have it rotate between 0 and 360 degrees, but I'm actually going to have this absolute rotation. So that means it doesn't matter what the local rotation is, it will rotate 360 degrees around the actual mesh. And then we can specify the angle that all of the branches are kind of angled down. So I'm going to specify something between 60 and 90 degrees. And then I'm going to grab myself another transform points, and this is going to be relative rotation, and I'm just going to have it spin 360 degrees around itself. So that way, none of them are always facing up the same way. After that, we can grab ourselves another static mesh spawner, and then get ourselves our branch A as our mesh. I'll go ahead and select it. And now you could see all of our actual branches here are facing a random direction. And if I go into this first transform points, I can have them face more upwards or face more downwards, depending on the angle that we set here. If I want them kind of more up, I specify a lower angle minimum. If I want them more angled sideways or even down, I can specify over 90 degrees. So I can do something like 120 degrees and 60 degrees. And so some of them will just be actually angled down, as you can see here. But of course, right now we are still only using one of these points. We want to have a variation. So I'll set up between 50 and 90 degrees for myself. And then what we're going to do is add a few more branches. So I'm going to take these transform points and I'm going to duplicate it however many times we want to have the branches. So let's say I want up to 5 branches in a random direction. I'll go ahead and plug in the transform points into all of these. And then what I'm going to do is select each one of them and give them a random seed. So I'm going to click and drag either right or left to make sure that they all have a random seed. And then I will go ahead and merge these down. So that way, instead of 5 individual sets of points, it is 1 set of points. And that is going to go into our transform points. That is the relative one for 360 degree rotation. So now you can see it has actually created the new branches and, well, they're angled in a random rotation each time. And if you guys are enjoying the tutorial so far, I would love it if you hit the like button and subscribe while you're down there for more awesome tutorials like this. Let's get back to it. So now we have kind of the base of this tree. And so we need to pretty much, once again, do the same thing we did before. So what I'm going to do is go over here. I'm going to take this copy attributes, this socket to points, copy points. I'll grab one of the transform points, and then I'm going to duplicate it over to the side and plug it in from the static mesh spawner. The get attribute from point index, I'm going to specify branch, and then in the static mesh spawner, I will say out attribute branch. So it goes ahead and grabs the right point. And because we're now using branch A, you can see we are now using every single direction on this setup. We can just scale it 360 degrees to rotate it randomly around itself, and then specify 0 degrees on the X and the Y. And then we can do a static mesh spawner. And here we'll go ahead and plug in our branch B. And we want to turn off absolute rotation because this was all relative. You can see it is indeed spawning them in, but you see it is only spawning them on one single branch. And that is because we're copying the points to this attribute and it's only a single point. What we can do is just hold control and plug it into the static mesh spawner and go ahead and just reroute these points so you can see them better. So from the static mesh spawner into the copy points node, we're now get a very dense thicket of branches. But as I mentioned before, we want to have only the branches that kind of face upwards towards the sun. We don't want any of them facing downwards. So before the static mesh spawner, I go ahead and grab ourselves a normal to density node, and then we can grab ourselves a density filter. And if we plug that in right in between, and in the density filter, we can specify something like 0.01. And that way, even if it's basically pretty much sideways, we'll keep it. We can, of course, increase that value and we'll only keep more and more angled upwards. By just having a single value here that isn't 0, you can now see that all of the branches that we're spawning on this tree all face upwards. So even though we have specified 360 degrees in each one of these branches, we're now only left with the ones facing upwards. So now let's go ahead and add the leaves, the final part. I'll specify that out attribute name to be branch B. And then we can go back here and do the same thing as before. Just grab all of this, copy it, and paste it in here. Again, plug in the get attribute into the static mesh spawner, and from here we'll drag this in because again we want to affect all of the actual points. In the get attribute from point index, we'll want to swap the branch to branch B, the exact same name that we have out here. And now, because in our case we have the leaves kind of all here facing the same way, I now want to rotate them in all direction. Maybe a branch is sticking out one direction, one be another direction. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take these points and then I'm going to keep them 360 degrees so it's spinning around itself in any direction, but I'm also going to give it a bit of rotation in the X and Y. So I'm going to go from negative 45 to positive 45 on both X and Y. So it has a bit of leeway and 360 degrees around. And then I'm going to take it and I'm going to duplicate it twice more and plug all of these copy points into them. And then I'm going to change the seed. So each one of these now has a new seed. And then we merge them together as we did originally. And now we can do a static mesh spawner and add our leaves and tree in here. And one thing that I did forget is in our mesh sockets to points, we're no longer using the tag branch. We're now using the tag leaves because we're spawning leaves now. So now if we take a look, you can see now our tree is now luscious and has leaves all on top of it. And if we go ahead and take it and just generate a new one, we can grab a new tree type each time that has a slightly different variation based on the settings we have specified. And if you're happy with the tree, let's say this tree is great, you want to reuse this, you can go ahead and select it, scroll down to PCG, and then click clear PCG link. And then you can click on this tree. It's now a simple blueprint with all the pieces instanced together. So now I can take this anywhere, move it, rotate it, scale it, and it'll always stay the exact same type. And then I can go back to the actual BP tree here, go to PCG and click generate, or I can just select it and just move it to the side and it'll regenerate itself. So really quickly, we can go ahead and just make a few of these and create a thicket of forests with a few variations of trees. Because we're using socket points for this, I can go ahead and scale this to any size I want and everything will proportionally scale with it. So I can make some of these guys bigger. I can make this one a bit smaller, and you can see everything proportionally scales together. Of course, for your setup, you can create more branches than this and just prune some of them randomly so you have a big of a variation. So not every layer is the same amount. You can have variations of branches. You have some of different shapes. Maybe some are broken and those don't have an actual output. You can have some of these trunks have leaves on them already to create a different look. You have a lot of control, but this is the kind of the baseline, the method to create these trees for yourself. Of course, if you want to try out the trees that I've made here, as always, the project files is available on my Patreon, where you can join these lovely people here in supporting what I do. It really means a lot and helps me out greatly. So thank you again to them. And thank you guys so much for watching. And if you're interested in seeing what other things you can do with mesh sockets, check out this video right here, where I show you how to create modular buildings using a similar method.